The first half of season 2 is arguably some of the best of the season, but after the Shadow the Hedgehog arc, halfway through the season, most of this is very much filler and it goes nowhere until the final 3 or 4 episodes of the season. So, the first half of season 2 are retellings of the plots of Sonic Adventures 1 and 2. So, season 2 arguably has the most sagas out of the whole series, enough to fool people into thinking that each of them were their own season, but so overall, I like the Chaos Saga much better than the Shadow Saga. I personally do prefer Sonic Adventure better as a video game and even a story. And I feel like Sonic X did a better job at adapting the story with its changes compared to the adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2. Now, Chaos Zero was always my favorite Sonic villain, and it was neat to see the villain animated in a hand-drawn animated form. Perfect Chaos looks so much better in the show compared to his ugly in-game model from Sonic Adventure. So, continuing where Season 1 left off, it's revealed that Sonic and Pals didn't actually return to their home worlds. Instead, Sonic used Chaos Control to make both Knuckles and Chris get their ways. Sonic ended up merging his world with Chris's world, causing many creatures and locations from Sonic's world to be dropped into the human world. As a kid, I always thought that was a cool way of trying to explain the jump between the Genesis to the Sega Dreamcast settings. And so nowadays, Sega tries retconning this by saying Sonic and the human world were always one world. They were never split apart or, set into different dimensions or something. They were always one big thing. So they're trying to say that the world from Sonic Adventure was the same as the one you saw in Sega Genesis. And a lot of fans aren't buying it, especially after watching Sonic X or even the Sonic movies for that matter. So, Sonic Adventure never really had a straight plot since it was basically one big story being told through the perspective of 5 different characters. And it was fun to see how Sonic X tried telling it in one big story, one big narrative. So it was fun to see what scenes from the game they chose to tell first. So, opening up, we see Big the Cat witnessing Froggy swallow a bit of Chaos Zero, running away with a Chaos Emerald after growing a tail, and so, meanwhile, we see what everyone else has been up to since the worlds have merged, like how Amy finally got her own apartment. A detail that was mentioned in a previous episode, but only in the Japanese dub, happened during the episode with the ghosts. Amy mentioned to Chris how her dream is to open up a cafe and live in her own apartment. And so, the English version of the show mostly omitted a lot of the scenes where Amy's in an apartment, except for this first episode of season 2. It's kind of a shame though, because some of the scenes that show Amy in her apartment or her job of wanting to be, having her own cafe, it's like they were some interesting scenes, and it's kind of a shame they cut them out. But so meanwhile, we see that Cream is still living with Chris. Tails opened up a workshop at Mystic Ruins, and so it was cool to see how Cream the Rabbit was included in the story, since she wasn't even a thing when Sonic Adventure was first created, but it was cool to see the episodes kind of making you think that she was there in the video game the whole time. Unless you count her little cameos in the Adventure DX remake. But so Chris and Cream end up running into Big the Cat, and they try to help him find Froggy. The town is eventually attacked by a water-like monster called Chaos Zero, who gets stronger when he eats a Chaos Emerald. And it turns out Eggman is controlling Chaos to try and take over the world again. Sonic and Knuckles fight off Chaos for the time being. Knuckles eventually shares his story on how Chaos Zero came from the Master Emerald, and he ended up shattering and scattering the pieces. So, Knuckles is off to find the pieces of the Master Emerald and restore them again, while getting strange visions from the past by a girl Echidna named Tikal, who turns out to be one of his ancient ancestors. And so, it turns out she was trying to protect both Chaos Zero and the Chow that Chaos was trying to protect. Because her tribe of echidnas were trying to kill them for some reason. Chris decides to help Big find Froggy. Meanwhile, Eggman built a new series of robots powered by animals, which he calls the E10 series. So he orders them to find a frog with a tail, obviously Froggy, only because he has a Chaos Emerald. And so one of Eggman's animals escaped his mother's ship, the egg carrier. The escaped animal was a flicky bird, who ends up across Amy's path, and so Amy decides that she's going to look after the bird, and she names her Lily. Later, a robot minion of Eggman's named Zero kidnaps Amy and her bird friend, so Sonic gets Tails in his plane, along with Knuckles, to fly off and try to rescue Amy. Well, Knuckles is mostly coming along to the egg carrier because he knows that pieces of the Master Emerald are on there, but Sonic and Tails are focused on saving Amy. So, meanwhile, one of Eggman's minions named E102 Gamma is ordered to retrieve Amy's bird, but Amy refuses and makes Gamma question his functions and why he's doing all this stuff for Eggman, leading Gamma to be confused by his feelings towards Amy, the bird, and making him question his functions. So, it causes him to basically break them out and let him go free. As Sonic and Tails catch up to Amy, Eggman takes Lily and reveals she had a Chaos Emerald in her necklace the whole time, explaining why Eggman was after the bird to begin with. Eggman orders Gamma to destroy Sonic. As Sonic tries attacking Gamma, Amy begs Sonic not to hurt him, claiming that Gamma's her friend and he helped her. So Sonic ends up giving in to Amy's request. So Gamma questions why Amy saved him, and she says it's because they're friends, causing Gamma to basically question his functions even further, leading to a later story in this arc, but I'll get to that later. So, as Sonic asks Tails to take Amy back down to safety, Sonic and Knuckles stay behind to fight an upgraded Chaos Zero, who now has 6 Chaos Emeralds. They also try rescuing Chris, Big, and Froggy, who are eaten by Chaos. Upon defeating Chaos, the egg carrier ends up crashing into the ocean. Big notices Tails' airplane and decides to take it to get off of the egg carrier. Amy realizes Lily's siblings were still on the egg carrier, causing Amy to have to take a rowboat back to the crashed landing of the egg carrier and try to find Lily's family members. Meanwhile, Gamma feels like he needs to free his brothers from Eggman's control by shutting them down or defeating them. Along the way, he finds some of his brothers were heavily weaponized. As Gamma fights his last brother, Beta, he manages to get destroyed as well as destroying Beta, revealing that Lily's brother and sister were trapped in both robots respectively. I gotta admit, I thought Sonic X kind of topped the sadness of the scene compared to how it was handled in the video game. Because we actually see Amy witnessing Gamma's death, and yeah, it made me realize, like, yeah, in the game, this, like, Amy's final battle basically took place at when Gamma died, and yet they didn't bother seeing Amy, notice Gamma dying and responding sadly to his death. And I liked how Sonic X showed that she was there the whole time, and we see her sadness from seeing Gamma die, but then see her get happy that Lily was reunited with one of her siblings who were trapped inside Gamma and his brother. And so yeah, that was a really cool change. I liked that. After a few more visions to Tikal's past, we learned that the Chao Chaos Zero was protecting were killed by the Echidna tribe, and even attacked Tikal, possibly leading to her death as well. And it causes Chaos to get into him in an angered fit, and Tikal was only able to stop him by sealing him inside the Master Emerald before she died. And so Chaos eventually gets the 7th Chaos Emerald back in present time and turns into a giant liquefied monster that ends up flooding Station Square. He absorbed all the energy from the Chaos Emeralds, so we thought. So he left nothing but just these empty husks of the Chaos Emeralds on the ground. The gang thinks stopping Chaos is hopeless now until Tikal's spirit returns and explains how Chaos only absorbed the negative energy, and that the Chaos Emeralds can still be used with positive energy to try to calm Chaos Zero down, waiting for Sonic's friends to gather the remaining emeralds, give them Sonic, and root for him, causing the emeralds to recharge with positive energy and turn Sonic into a super form to try and cleanse Chaos Zero's anger, basically. And so I thought it was neat to have Tikal be the one to tell Sonic about the positive and negative energy of the Chaos Emeralds compared to the games where it was Tails who said that out of nowhere. Honestly, I thought it made more sense for Tikal to be the one that mentioned that. And so upon defeating Perfect Chaos, Chaos returns back to his old self and smiles when he realizes that there are still Chao roaming around alive today on Earth. And so, feeling relieved, he goes back with Tikal into the afterlife. And overall, it's a great retelling of one of my favorite Sonic the Hedgehog stories in video games, and had such beautiful artwork that makes it a lot harder to look back at the graphics and voice acting of the original games. And so any changes made to the story I felt helped improve the story compared to some of the other story changes they made for the Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation. So with that out of the way, onto the Project Shadow arc. Interestingly enough, the first episode of the saga serves as a bridge between the events of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, as we see Station Square is still recovering from the effects of Perfect Chaos, a lot of property damage, civilians trapped under debris, etc. It was an interesting idea, but I feel like it took up way too much of the episode's runtime without going anywhere. Apparently, Chris is sad that he has to move to another one of his parents' mansions in the meantime, which honestly didn't feel like a big deal because I swear the mansions looked exactly alike. They had like the same rooms, the same layout, so it just felt pointless. The episode ends with Eggman sneaking into a government base and discovering the diary of his grandpa, Gerald Robotnik. Eggman learns that he was originally from the human world and finds info on Gerald's experiment for the ultimate destruction called Project Shadow. The next episode cuts straight to the beginning of Sonic's story from Sonic Adventure 2, where with no explanation, Sonic is under arrest on a helicopter, and he breaks out and ends up snowboarding down the streets of Station Square. We learn Sonic was framed by a black hedgehog named Shadow, who turns out to be a tough foe for Sonic, matching a lot of his abilities and speed, and he's even able to manipulate time and space with Chaos Control, using just the power of one Chaos Emerald he stole. So basically, Sonic was framed for Shadow stealing the Chaos Emerald from a museum. How did the humans get a Chaos Emerald, and why is it in a museum? You think by now they'd realize how important these Chaos Emeralds are to Sonic and why he needs to keep them instead of someone like Dr. Eggman. So, yeah, not to mention how stupid everyone is for mistaking Shadow for the likes of Sonic. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it was a problem in the original game, but it feels like you think they would come up with a better excuse for why people fell for it in this, and it just makes everyone look like complete idiots. I mean, I don't see how anyone can mistake a blue hedgehog for a black hedgehog. I don't know. But it just makes the humans look like ungrateful assholes that trust Sonic so quickly. And so I hope you like seeing the world turn on Sonic and pals over dumb reasons, because for some reason, Season 2 reuses a very similar conflict just a few episodes after this whole Sonic Adventure 2 arc gets wrapped up. It's so crazy. So Sonic ends up turning himself in hopes of finding out more about his doppelganger at Prison Island. We learn Shadow is working with Dr. Eggman after Eggman freed Shadow from a machine he was sealed in for 50 years. Meanwhile, Rouge is ordered by the government to spy on Eggman and learn about Project Shadow. Rouge pretends to want to join Eggman along with helping him get some Chaos Emeralds, which she plans to steal for herself. Eggman plans a Chaos Emerald heist at Prison Island while plotting to blow it up as well. Tails and Amy decide to head to Prison Island to break Sonic out, while Chris and Mr. Tanaka tried to do the same. We get many recreations of some memorable scenes from Sonic Adventure 2, including Amy mistaking Shadow for Sonic, Amy breaking Sonic out of prison, while Tails fights off Eggman in his plane. We see Rouge trying to steal the Chaos Emeralds, only to get trapped in a vault and needing Shadow to rescue her. However, here is where the biggest fault of Sonic Adventure 2's story falls flat when it comes to the Sonic X version of it, and that was the forced shoehorning of Chris. It's bad enough he took over Rouge's role during this scene, but he later takes over a much more important job that was given for Amy. It was like her big role in the game, and what they did in the end was it just made what was supposed to be a dramatic scene, it turned it into laughable garbage. So in the original game, Rouge begged Shadow to save her from the vault, and her plea reminded him of a flashback to a girl named Maria, who was Shadow's best friend. And the more you watch the plot of this unfold, you understand why that was so important. And this plea caused Shadow to give in and rescue Rouge, because all he could think of was his friend Maria's last request. And so in Sonic X, Chris was shoved into this scene where he ended up warping to save Rouge, only for Chris to charge in out of nowhere, ending up in the same vault as Rouge. So Shadow nearly leaves Chris behind, with Rouge objecting to leave Chris to die. Chris then starts begging Shadow to not leave him to die, which caused Shadow to remember Maria's words, and this just made me cringe. In the original game, both Amy and Rouge were supposed to remind Shadow of a dear friend he lost in the past. There's something poetic about him hearing those two girls echo the words of his friend, causing Shadow to overlook his current hatred and show that he still has some good in him. All of this was thrown out the window when Rouge and Amy's roles were stolen by Chris, despite how they are right there in the scenes where this stuff was supposed to happen. They easily could have had those scenes be recreated faithfully as they were in the games, but nope, they decided to push them to the background and focus on Chris. And I get that maybe the writer's thought Chris would work because he was a human just like Maria, so maybe Shadow would see that not all humans are bad, but I don't know. But it's just so laughably bad when Shadow looks at Chris and then all of a sudden he imagines her as a girl. It's just so embarrassing. It made more sense when he did that with Rouge or Amy, but for Chris, it's just laughably bad. It's especially painful when later Chris is the one who talked Shadow into saving the world when the world desperately needed it. This was Amy's big scene of the game, and Chris took it from her. To make matters worse, they have Chris ask Shadow, "Is this what Maria would have wanted?" How in the hell would he know who Maria was to Shadow? Sure, he might have heard Maria's name mentioned in Gerald's video message, but Gerald didn't explain exactly who Maria was to Shadow. And so it just makes it sound like Chris suddenly knows about Maria, and he's trying to use that against Shadow to make him work with everyone. But it just came out of nowhere. I mean, nowhere in Sonic Adventure 2 did Amy say, like, what would Maria do? She was able to get Shadow to remind Maria just because she said words that Maria happened to say. Yeah, just like give them a chance to be happy. That's all he needed to hear to be reminded of his promise to Maria. And so, I don't know. I just feel like Chris really killed the Sonic Adventure 2 story for me in this show. It was just poorly handled and laughably bad. On the bright side, we did get to see Shadow punching Chris against the wall a number of times, so that's the only plus we got from it, I guess. But so, of course, Shadow gives in to Chris's plea and warps himself, Rouge, and Chris to a giant spacecraft called the Space Colony Ark. Here we learn that Eggman is using the Chaos Emerald to power a weapon called the Eclipse Cannon, which Eggman threatens to use on the Earth unless his demands are given. Eggman demonstrates the cannon's power by blowing the moon in half. Sonic and Tails are off to space in order to stop Dr. Eggman. So you still got some of the scenes from the games in here. You got like Knuckles needing to explore a pyramid and finding a way to go further or something, and then there's a part where like so after they make it to space, Knuckles fights Rouge the Bat only to save her life from falling to her death. We get the scene where Sonic and Tails try tricking Eggman with a fake Chaos Emerald only for Amy to be held hostage, and so leading to Sonic getting trapped and Tails accidentally revealing the emerald was a fake. And so the scene was done so much better in the game. It was more suspenseful and serious, and there was more build up to it. Especially, it happened so fast in the Sonic X version. It felt rushed and less dangerous. We didn't see like Eggman holding a gun up to Amy's head like he did in the video game. He just has her like in a little claws of a robot. It just didn't seem as threatening as it was in Adventure 2. So in the game, it was a mystery to what happened to both Tails and Amy, as it happened while Sonic was in a different room and he heard it happening over Tails' communicator. He got cut off when he tried telling Sonic what Eggman did to Amy, and so Sonic is forced to race from one end of the arc to the other to rescue Amy and Tails. And Sonic X, it just happened all too quickly. There was no build-up to the scene, and so we see Eggman get mad that Tails tried giving a fake emerald, and he dropped Sonic into space with a capsule, and it was so much better in the original game, where instead of Eggman actually realizing he was fooled, he outsmarted Tails by saying, like, did you think you could fool me with that fake emerald? Causing Tails to say, how did you know it was fake? And then he said, because you just told me, fox boy. And that was so much better compared to how Sonic X handled it, and so Sonic manages to escape the falling capsule by pulling off Chaos Control with the fake emerald he had, and Eggman manages to get away with the real Chaos Emerald that Tails had, giving him all 7 Chaos Emeralds, which he uses to fully power the Eclipse Cannon. So the same twist from Sonic Adventure 2 kicks in, as the Space Colony Ark ends up hurling towards the Earth, as a video message recording from Gerald Robotnik is sent to the world, basically being a death sentence to humanity, showing his final threat before he was sentenced to death. We learned that he was angered for his research being shut down by the gun agency, along with the death of his granddaughter Maria, who was killed by a gun soldier after she tried helping Shadow escape. So Shadow turned out to be a creation of Gerald Robotnik, built to help people, but the government didn't give them a chance and assumed they were dangerous, invaded Gerald's lab, tried shutting all of his research down, and so, as dramatic and tragic as this story is, and as memorable as it is, it really doesn't make much sense the older you get. They expect us to believe that Gerald's prison cell had a working computer and other equipment that allowed him to pull off this revenge scheme. Basically, like cyber terrorism. He is able to send like all these coordinates and codes up into space that could power up some big cannon and unleash a giant monster, not to mention, that could help carry it out. With the use of the 7 Chaos Emeralds. I mean, It made for an epic final battle in a video game as a kid, but it does make for a very weird story, especially for anime standards, even. It's worth mentioning that the 4Kids dub made this so much worse by trying to hide the fact that Maria died. They just say she was taken away. They excluded like the sound of her being shot by a gun, and I did find it kind of interesting though how there was a subplot where Mr. Stewart and a news reporter named Scarlett Garcia were doing journalist work to try to find out what truly happened on the space colony Ark 50 years ago, as that like information has been discarded and hidden from the government, and so or the president at least, and so they eventually find an old veteran who was the one responsible for shooting Maria. And it's honestly a heartbreaking scene to see the old man break down the tears, feeling bad for what he had to do years ago and saying like how he didn't want to do it. And the scene itself was interesting, but I do feel like there were too many scenes that were wasted on Mr. Stewart and Scarlett that did kind of drag on. I kind of wish they got to this bit a lot quicker. Sonic, his friends, and Eggman team up to try and shut down the machine before the world is destroyed. Then comes the moment where Amy was supposed to talk Shadow into helping everyone save the world, but she gets pushed aside in favor of Chris to ruin the scene. And like I said, the only plus side is we got to see Shadow punch Chris against the wall a few times, which was cut out from the English dub, sadly. But they still showed Chris looking all beat up and worn out in the English dub. It just made you wonder, how do you get passed out just for begging someone to please help them? It's so stupid. So Shadow ends up meeting with Sonic and Knuckles, who get attacked by a failed prototype of Shadow called the Bio-Lizard. Shadow manages to attack it until it flees, and it merges itself with the Ark, forcing it to move into the Earth at a faster velocity. With time running out, Sonic and Shadow use the Chaos Emeralds to become their super forms, and they fly off to fight off the Bio-Lizard, and Shadow ends up using the last of his strength to finish the Bio-Lizard and send the Ark to safety. So Sonic comes back to meet up with everyone, saying how he tried saving Shadow, but all he could find of him was his inhibitor rings. So the gang basically mourn the loss of Shadow as they get ready to head back and return home back to Earth. Sonic turns around, looks into space, and says, "Adios, Shadow the Hedgehog." While it overall retells the same story of Sonic Adventure 2, I think the story got heavily dragged down by many minutes wasted on the human characters, especially Chris. Sonic Adventure 2 is considered one of the darkest and most memorable Sonic stories, but I honestly find the story more flawed the older I get. Shadow was still an interesting character with a very tragic and empathetic backstory, but the story has a lot of plot holes, and I honestly prefer the game's cutscenes more than the Sonic X retelling, despite how the game had very bad voice acting and audio mixing. Sonic Adventure 2 arguably had better music than what the Sonic X episodes provided, which helped make a lot of these scenes more memorable and iconic in the game. So, after the Shadow arc, we're given a rather quirky and funny episode that introduces Team Chaotix. So, around the time, the audience was reintroduced to the Chaotix in the game Sonic Heroes as the quirky detective agency. It was neat to see Sonic X trying to loosely promote their involvement in Sonic Heroes by giving him an episode to star in Sonic X. The episode begins showing that after Sonic and Shadow save the world, even more of Sonic's world is merging with the human world, bringing in more characters and locations, including the Chaotix. The episode introduces us to each member of the Chaotix, consisting of Vector the Crocodile, the boneheaded yet lovable self-appointed leader who loves making a sale but loves solving mysteries more. There's Charmy B, who is just the loud and energetic kid of the trio, and Espio, a ninja chameleon. One of the biggest mysteries the Chaotix will likely never be able to solve is why someone like Espio bothers hanging out with the likes of Vector and Charmy. So, it's like, was he shunned from his ninja clan or something? We need a Chaotix origin story, for crying out loud. So, the main gist of the episode is that the Chaotix are convinced that Sonic kidnapped Cream the Rabbit and are on a mission to save her and return her to her mom. Meanwhile, unlike the video game, this show bothers addressing a big issue that occurred in Sonic Adventure 2. Are we just going to ignore the fact that Eggman blasted the freaking moon in half? And so Eggman volunteers to go into space and fix it, no charge. He manages to rebuild the other half out of metal, and Eggman claims he's done doing evil deeds, but it's obviously a ruse for another diabolical plan that he has brewing, and it carries over into the next two episodes. Meanwhile, Sonic manages to find Cream's mother, Vanilla, and reunites her with her daughter. A pretty heartwarming ending. Strangely enough, the show never addressed Vanilla by her actual name and just refers to her as Cream's mom. To the point of even having a hilariously bad scene where, in the final episode of season 2, we see Vanilla's house and it has a sign that reads, "The House of Cream's Mom." It's so laughably bad. The next set of 5 episodes are honestly a real annoying batch of episodes. So first we get an episode where Eggman's egg moon backfires. It somehow prevents sunlight from reaching the earth, and Eggman comes up with a solution for people to order basically street lights to put in their yards to bring the light back. So everyone dumbly falls for it and gets hypnotized by Eggman's product, and they want to vote for him to be president. Sonic is the only one smart enough to not fall for this and ends up destroying Eggman's generators for his like light bulbs or whatever. And so it causes everyone to make Sonic and his pals public enemy number one. And so eventually it turns out that what Eggman did to the moon wasn't actually what caused the eclipse. It was because he was doing something to cause the moon to keep rotating against like the Earth's orbit and the sun's orbit and all that, causing an eternal blackout across Earth. So it's basically Sonic was doing everyone a favor by destroying all those devices. And so overall, I found these episodes very frustrating and not worth wasting 2 whole episodes on. I always thought the quiz ending at the very ending was confusing in the 4Kids dub and thought maybe it would make more sense in context for the Japanese version. And honestly, I was more confused by it in the Japanese version. It's just such a random way to end an episode. The next episode is overall another frustrating one, but it does introduce a rather important character from Sonic Battle named Emerald. Oddly enough, the 4Kids dub messed up his name and called him ML. It totally missed the joke on how he was named after the Chaos Emeralds, so he is called Emerald for short. But so while the 2 final episodes that featured Emerald were memorable, there's no denying that the show really butchered Emerald's story and character, not bothering to give him a backstory or a reason to exist in the show. And he was made by Gerald Robotnik, it turned out, the same person who made Shadow, and that was completely glossed over in this show. It doesn't explain how Eggman happened to begin with, or why he awoke him to begin with. All you need to know is that the character Bo Kun wakes him up at the beginning, and somehow leads to him ending up in Chris's backyard at the end, where Cream the Rabbit finds him and befriends him. So, you could argue Sonic Battle had a very dumb plot, just a lame excuse to have characters beating each other up for no reason. But when it comes to why the characters are fighting in the Sonic X adaptation, it was honestly a more fun plot for it. But when it came to Emerald's story, though, it's a huge downgrade. Still good episodes, though, but it doesn't quite have like the same gravitas that Sonic Battle gave him. And so before I get on to the Sonic Battle episodes, we have 3 filler episodes that go on before we get to those, and they all kind of frustrated me. The first one especially. So for how it portrayed both Sonic and Amy, I thought was very poorly. The whole episode focuses on Amy being furious because Sonic finally asked her out on a date, but he never showed up. It's revealed that he missed out on their date because he found out Bo Kun was trying to break Eggman out of prison and figured that was a bigger priority. But he didn't bother leaving Amy a note or message or apology for why he had to leave. And I remember feeling bad for Amy in this episode. But Amy was written very angry and bratty in this episode, so I don't know. It's like you feel bad for a situation, but it doesn't excuse her for how she was acting. And to make matters worse, Sonic also set up a date to race Sam's new car. Amy forces Sam to take her on a date, and okay, this was just creepy. The episode tries making Amy see things through Sonic's perspective down the line, which just felt wrong in my opinion. Now, it was neat to see Amy, like, that scene where, like, she's going through, like, the race car and she sees, like, all the zooms and the lines flying into her face, making her realize why Sonic loves to run so fast. It's like great scene, but at the same time, it's like this episode is trying to make it seem like it's okay for her to, well, it's okay for Sonic to treat his friends the way he does, and no, it's not. It's one thing to have a love for freedom and speed, but it does not give you the right to ditch your friends and treat them as poorly as Sonic does to his friends. And again, like, I don't get why the show is so obsessed with glorifying Sonic without pointing out his flaws or trying to make him fix it. It's kind of annoying. I don't like characters like that. So the episode's ending was very frustrating too, where Sonic finally meets up with Amy at the end, only to ignore her to race Sam's new car, leaving Amy stranded on a beach. I remember this ending really pissed me off as a kid. I just felt like that was totally uncalled for, very mean spirited. And so, meanwhile, Cream ends up finding Emerald in her backyard, well, in Chris's backyard, and so, yeah. The next episode, it's not necessarily bad, but it's not that memorable either. Eggman manages to break out of prison with an army of robotic kitchen appliances that end up attacking Station Square. So Sonic, Knuckles, and the others have to fight them off, basically. And the next episode was honestly one of my least favorite episodes of the whole show. It's just so boring and forgettable. So basically, Mr. Stewart is on a spy mission towards Eggman, but Chris, his friends, Cream, and Emerald end up being dragged along into the mix. It's just so boring. It's the most boring episode of the whole show, in my opinion. Nothing happens. Finally, we do get to the two Sonic Battle episodes, and these were overall a great pairing of episodes. Chris's dad decides to hold a fighting tournament featuring Sonic, Knuckles, and Rouge as the main opponents, with the prize being a Chaos Emerald. So all of Sonic's friends are signed up for the event, including Emerald. So we also see a lot of the supporting human characters show up, and so it's just a really funny set of episodes where we see these entertaining battle sequences, and some of them have a lot of comic relief throughout. Like Deco and Boko, entering the tournament and having to fight each other only for their match to get interrupted because the police are after them. They identify them as the escaped convicts, and that was pretty funny. The Japanese version even includes an exclusive scene where Big the Cat is forced to fight Ella. Big almost won, but he ran out of the ring in fear, causing him to be disqualified. It was funny how Ella nearly got defeated just because she fainted at Froggy jumping at her face, but she won anyways because Big accidentally ran out of the arena. And so we get a funny scene where Tails had to fight Rouge, and Rouge was able to win because she kissed Tails, causing him to get dazed and confused. And part one ends with Sonic being forced to fight Amy. Both don't know how to handle this situation, but Eggman tries firing a laser at Amy, causing Sonic to save her, and he ends up forfeiting the match to chase after Eggman angrily, causing Amy to feel flattered. So, part two has Amy losing to Rouge, which honestly felt very rushed and abrupt. I felt like there should have been a better fight. Like, I'm not mad that Amy lost, I just felt like the way she was defeated just felt way too abrupt and unexplained. It just happened way too quickly. So Knuckles has to fight Rouge, and she tries tricking Knuckles into fighting in a dark tent, feeling like their fight will be too brutal for the audience to deserve, basically. So she's trying to trick him into letting his guard down, since she has better senses in the dark because she's a bat. But after hearing like a bunch of noises of basically what sounds like Rouge beating the crap out of Knuckles, they make it look like Rouge actually won. But as she makes her exit, she ends up collapsing, and it's revealed that Knuckles is still standing, so he won, and that was a pretty good payoff. So throughout these episodes, we see how Emerald has an ability where he can copy combatants' data and replicate their attacks in battle. So the finals start, and it's Knuckles versus Emerald. Knuckles was worn out from his match with Rouge and ends up forfeiting. So Emerald gets the Chaos Emerald prize, but its power causes Emerald to go into a berserk attack mode as he starts attacking everyone. A bit of a stretch, since in Sonic Battle, getting one Chaos Emerald didn't corrupt him. Like, it actually gave him intelligence. Like, he was able to start speaking baby talk, and as he kept getting more intelligent. And it wasn't until he got the 7th Chaos Emerald where he began losing control. And so I don't know. Yeah, it is what it is, I guess. But so, anyways, Cream is traumatized by seeing her close friends getting hurt by Emerald, and to the point where even her own mother nearly got crushed by Emerald. If it wasn't for Sonic, her mom would have died. And so, this was a very important episode for Cream and Cheese. Not only was it the first episode to introduce Cream's ability to fly, as we've seen in the video games. Because, yeah, up to this point, Cream never used her ears to fly like she did in the games, but she was able to do it to save Sonic's life at one point. But it's also the first time we see her and Cheese having to fight in self-defense. So Emerald was only able to copy the other fighters because he can only copy one fighter at a time. But since Cream and Cheese were attacking him both at once, he didn't have time to copy either one of their abilities. So gave Cream and Cheese the advantage in defeating them. And it leads to a very heartbreaking scene where Cream and Cheese kick Emerald into the ocean, causing him to explode and leaving the two to cry in horror over what just happened. Overall, these were a great pair of episodes. They started off so fun and hilarious, but have a very heartbreaking ending. We got a few more filler episodes. One that leads to Deco and Boko getting fed up with Eggman to the point where they abandon him and join Chris's side. That does not last long. It's like 2 or 3 episodes later, they're back on Eggman's side for no reason. So after that, we get the final 4 episodes of the season where Chuck gets a rather upsetting phone call from the government revealing that Sonic's world and their world used to be one, but it was separated to parallel dimensions somehow because both worlds together caused time to freeze eventually. So it just makes the world realize that everything from Sonic World needs to go back to their own dimension, otherwise time will freeze again. Chris is horrified by this and is in complete denial. He is not ready to say goodbye to Sonic, and he thinks it's another one of Eggman's schemes. And so Chris goes to confront Eggman, only to get the harsh truth that Eggman is not behind this. It makes Chris cry and run away, even causing Eggman to feel sorry for him in the process. So these episodes do have some very memorable and heartbreaking scenes, but I honestly feel like a lot of this should have been reduced to just 2 episodes instead of dragging them on into 4 episodes. The next episode shows everyone preparing to leave. We get a sad shot of Amy having to leave her apartment as she empties it out, taking one last look before closing the door and leaving, a scene that was cruelly left out of the 4Kids dub. Meanwhile, we get a really bad diversion where a prison warden or something sees Sonic and pals as criminals, and he's trying to overthrow the president so he can kill Sonic and Eggman before they have a chance to go back to their home world. So this BS came out of nowhere, and it just drags the episode even longer. So after Sonic finally settles this, he's able to rescue Eggman and get him through the portal to get back to their dimension. We get some emotional farewells between Tails and Chuck. I forgot to mention that although I didn't like a whole lot of the human characters, I thought Chuck was a cool character, and he seemed like a really cool mentor for Tails, and Tails was pretty much like the son and grandson Chuck always wanted. So we also see Amy saying goodbye to Ella, we see Cream saying goodbye to Chris's friends, and even Rouge saying goodbye to Agent Topaz, and pretty heartwarming farewells. So if Sonic being the last one to enter the portal after Knuckles, the audience is left shocked as Chris does the worst thing he's ever done in this whole series, as he shuts the portal off, preventing Sonic from returning home. Sonic is left horrified and confused over what Chris has just done. The next episode contains Chris basically kidnapping Sonic against his will and running away. Chances are people already hated Chris before this episode, but this is the episode that cemented people's absolute hatred for Chris. There was no redemption for this character after this. What he did was totally selfish, idiotic, and downright psychotic. It's like you could redub like these scenes over with like a psycho horror music, and it would fit the scene just fine. So the episode has the nerve to try and make us feel sorry for Chris because he thinks his life would be a total misery without Sonic. But as I established earlier, there are many plot holes to Chris's so-called trauma that it just doesn't justify his actions. Chris also seems to be doing this to try and bait his parents into chasing after him and spending more time with him as well. Meanwhile, Sonic is constantly playing with Chris by hiding his confusion or frustrations for what Chris just put him through. Sonic is basically trying to get Chris to wise up and let Sonic go on his own free will, which eventually Chris does do the right thing and does let Sonic go. It turns out Sonic could have used Chaos Control on his own all along. He had the 7 Chaos Emeralds with him the whole time. And Shadow was able to teach him that he could use the Chaos Emeralds to Chaos Control. So, yeah, Sonic had a way to get home the whole time. So he just wanted to make sure that Chris was finally ready to say goodbye before leaving. So eventually, Chris's parents do find Chris at an old lake house that they took him to years ago, and Chris has the nerve to just stand there with a stupid smile on his face, like he didn't just kidnap someone and nearly screw the whole world over in the process. Seriously, Chris's stunt should have made him the most hated person in the world, and how he nearly screwed everyone in the process. But nope, everyone still liked Chris for some reason, in the show at least. So, admittedly, the season finale was so much better, where we see it's been days since everyone but Sonic returned back home. Eggman is desperate without his nemesis to fight and starts annoying everyone. Vanilla and Cream offer Amy to live with them since they fear she's lonely without Sonic. We get a funny scene where Amy gets annoyed with Eggman and starts throwing many hammers at his flying fortress, and I'm surprised other adaptations of Sonic don't bother bringing this detail in, but I always loved that detail how Amy could just summon hammers at will. She doesn't just have one hammer; she has many hammers. It makes you wonder why there's never like a game where she could double wield it, like have one hammer in two hands, and that would have been so cool. But it is both hilarious and badass at the same time. And meanwhile, Knuckles and Rouge are fighting for some dumb reason, and Tails is getting fed up with Eggman too, and gets into a big dogfight with Eggman. And so Eggman shoots a homing missile to try to scare Tails off, but Eggman is horrified to find out that there isn't a self-destruct switch on it, and so he's convinced that Tails is really going to die now. Out of nowhere, Sonic returns home in his super form. He saves Tails, destroys Eggman's ship, and we get shots of everyone being happy to see Sonic return, even Eggman. What follows is honestly my favorite scene in the whole show, where Amy looks out the window of Cream's house and sees Supersonic flying towards her house. Amy races through the night towards her house, and as the sun rises in the background, such beautiful imagery, by the way, we see Amy, out of breath, finally reach her house as Sonic is standing there waiting for her. Sonic waves to her, but Amy lets out her frustration and sadness over being worried if he was ever going to come back. She claimed how she was willing to wait until she was old and gray just to see him again. Amy collapses to the ground in tears and begs Sonic to just say that he loves her. Sonic then pulls out a white rose, and although Sonic's lips were muted, it's safe to assume that Sonic confesses love to her, as Amy's reaction is her hugging Sonic or just bawling her eyes out. I remember as a kid, this scene made me want to cry. It is such a beautiful scene. It's honestly better in the Japanese version, of course, but the episode still isn't over, though. I forgot to mention, the English version actually cut out the image of Sonic giving her the rose, which was a real crime. So, meanwhile, we cut back to the human world years later. We see a now 18-year-old Chris, who seemed to take after both Chuck and Tails, as he is now a scientist and an inventor. He's working on a portal to try to go back to Sonic's world, basically. So, meanwhile, we see that it looks like Chris is also dating Helen, and they meet up with their friends Francis and Danny at a cafe, and as the friends look back on their adventures with Sonic, leading to an unseen flashback of what happened before Sonic returned home. Before using Chaos Control, Sonic wanted Chris to hold on tight to him because he was going to go real fast. So as Chris closes his eyes, and he remembers all the times he had with Sonic, including when they first met. As Chris opens his eyes before Sonic warped back home, Chris sees tears running from Sonic's eyes. Overall, it's a very beautiful finale to the series, or at least it was supposed to be. So yeah, this was originally meant to be the show's finale. It was supposed to end after 2 seasons, but 4Kids was really impressed with the English dub with it, that they wanted the producers to make a third and final season, which eventually ended up becoming the Metarex saga. So many seem to feel mixed about the third season. Some like it and others wish it just ended where season 2 left off. Overall, I do enjoy Season 3 and don't regret it for being made, but there are many things I don't like about it as well. You'd think most of it would take place in Sonic's world, but it's actually a giant space opera where Sonic and pals travel to different planets and dimensions to fight off a new threat called the Metarex. Like, it would have been cool to spend a little more time on Sonic's homeworld, but you only see it for like the first and final episode of Season 3. Still more than you saw for like Season 1, for example, but... So yeah, they're forced to fight off a new threat called the Metarex, who threaten to eliminate all organic life forms, and they're trying to steal these life sources of each planet called the Planet Eggs. We're introduced to a new character, an alien plant girl called Cosmo the Cedrian, who later becomes a love interest for Tails. Now, Cosmo is a very likable and kind-hearted character, but she has a very tragic story. Spoiler alert, but what is it with Sega loving to kill off the innocent girl characters? So, the season begins with Supersonic in a tough match against the Metarex leader Dark Oak, who nearly defeats Supersonic for his Chaos Emeralds, but Sonic scatters the emeralds across space, preventing the Metarex from getting them for the time being. Sonic ends up crash landing back on Earth, only to be saved by Eggman, who ended up putting a tracker on Sonic for another scheme. Tails, Cream, and Amy are having a stargazing picnic until they notice Cosmo crash land onto the ground, and they bring Cosmo to Vanilla's place to nurse her back to health. When Cosmo awakens, she reveals she's looking for Sonic because he knows how to channel the Chaos Emeralds, which could be used to fight off the Metarex. Cosmo reveals how the Metarex are stealing the planet eggs from each planet, which causes the life of said plants to wither and die. Cosmo reveals her family was killed by the Metarex and doesn't want more planets or families to die. Sonic and pals agree to help her and make plans of voyage into space. Before they get a chance to do that, Chris ends up back in Sonic's world, but because time and space works differently in Sonic's world, Chris reverts back to being a 12-year-old. Honestly, that really sucked. It's bad enough that they had to bring Chris back, but once again, he looks and sounds like an annoying kid. A part of me kind of wishes that they kept him as his 18-year-old self instead of just giving him the mind of an 18-year-old, because I don't know. They tried making him an inventor this time who can save Sonic in many situations with new gadgets and such, but it felt so pointless. Doesn't Tails already take up that role? So it feels like they were just forced to give Tails a lesser role and give Chris the inventor role now. So Tails is more of like the captain of the ship now. He may have been teched on, but he was a little less annoying this time around. He was less whiny and at least a little more productive, but he still felt useless, pointless overall, I mean. But Tails reveals a new mothership he built called the Blue Typhoon, but realizes he built it to run on Chaos Emerald energy. So as a last resort, Sonic and Pal steal the Master Emerald to power the ship, forcing Knuckles to get dragged along on their mission as well. Overall, the space-filled adventures with Sonic and Pals was a very fun story arc that brought many fun and memorable moments into the show. Both Rouge and Eggman chase after Sonic in hopes of getting the Chaos Emeralds for themselves. For some reason, Shadow is forcefully reintroduced into the show in a similar fashion to his revival from Sonic Heroes. Once again, Shadow has no memories of his past and is working for Eggman for most of the show until he and Rouge eventually go separate ways from Eggman. And there are some memorable episodes here. For me, some of them include like the one where Sonic got lost on a jungle planet, causing Amy, Cream, and Cosmo to adventure off on their own to find Sonic themselves, while also reclaiming the planet's planet egg, as the three keep falling into traps that were made by a monkey Metarex, but they keep managing to get out with Sonic Heroes inspired teamwork. Now this right here, this is the real Team Rose. Forget Big the Cat. Replace him with Cosmo, that's the real Team Rose. There's the episode where Sonic, Amy, and Knuckles explore a haunted house that turns out to actually be a shape-shifting Metarex. This is also the episode where Shadow was brought back to everyone's shock. Another episode has Tails and Cosmo getting trapped underground, which starts the blossoming relationship between the two. And one great thing about Season 3 is that we got plenty more episodes that star the Chaotix and their hilarious shenanigans. Their first appearance has them getting a request from Vanilla to send some supplies to Chris that his family managed to send from their dimension back home. The Chaotix keep trying to board Sonic's ship to drop off the supplies, only to keep being mistaken for Metarex and getting beaten up by Sonic and his friends. Well, not Sonic per se, because I forgot to mention, in the same episode, Knuckles has to save Sonic, who accidentally ran overboard during a chess game, and so Knuckles is forced to try to hold onto a rope and look for Sonic and basically rope him back onto the ship. It's a funny little side plot, but eventually Vector gets a delusion that Vanilla asked him to bring Cream home, and he just wants to bring Cream home as a desperate attempt to get Vanilla to love him for returning her daughter, and the second Chaotix episode features the three being stranded in space and rescued by Sonic's crew. Cosmo and Tails are planning a surprise party for the crew to celebrate surviving a previous Metarex battle. Vector can't help but detect feelings between Tails and Cosmo, and goes to ridiculous lengths to try to get the two to confess their feelings for each other, leading to one hilarious mishap after another. The funniest consisting of when they knock out Knuckles, draw on his face, and have SPO turn invisible and use Knuckles as a puppet to try making it look like he's a thug threatening Cosmo, in hopes that Tails would step in to save her. Eventually, Knuckles wakes up and realizes what the Chaotix did to his face, and he chases them down and beats them up, accidentally destroying the party decorations in the process. Despite all this, the gang still throw a party, and Amy ends up stunning Sonic by showing up in a pretty party dress. There's one episode where Cosmo and Chris get captured and brutally hurt by the Metarex, causing Sonic to get angry and briefly turn into the show-exclusive Dark Supersonic. I know a lot of people love this moment, and they wish there was more of it. I've seen so many people to this day still make fan art of Dark Supersonic. It's overall an interesting episode, but I've seen many complain about how they hated Eggman's portrayal in this episode, because mainly how he argues with the Metarex that he doesn't like how they attacked Chris and Cosmo. He says it's one thing for you to cause destruction and threaten someone, but when you actually hurt someone, that's going too far. What is that for any villain to say? Eggman is not like that in the video game, so I don't know. Another episode involves Amy dragging the crew to a planet of fortune telling and love spells as she tries chasing Sonic into a love trap that will bound them with eternal love, only for her trap to backfire when Tails and Cosmo fall into it, and it's overall a very silly and hilarious episode. There's one tragic episode where Shadow and Rouge meet a resistance led by a young girl named Molly, who Shadow grows a lot of respect for, and Rouge can't help but think of parallels between Molly and Maria, who Shadow unfortunately can't remember. The episode ends tragically when Molly's crew betrays her to join the Metarex out of fear of dying without the Metarex's help. And so Molly refuses to let go of her fight to save her planet and ends up tragically dying and fighting for what she believes in, as she tries fighting off the Metarex by herself. Much later in the series, Shadow and Rouge find out the horrifying truth about the Metarex as we see the Metarex are alien plants, the same species as Cosmo, in fact. Shadow and Rouge find Molly's traitorous crew and see that they are being merged with trees, slowly dying in the process. The following episode is a very chilling one, where Shadow sneaks aboard the Blue Typhoon and tries murdering Cosmo in her sleep. So basically the goal was Shadow was trying to murder Cosmo before she found out what she really was. The whole episode features Tails desperately fleeing from Shadow, trying to protect Cosmo, as Sonic and Knuckles constantly fight off Shadow. And so I know some people are very divisive about this episode. A lot of people hated Shadow's portrayal in it, and it's overall a very dark but entertaining episode in my opinion. And in the end, we get a very shocking reveal as Dark Oak reveals that Cosmo was an unknowing spy for the Metarex the whole time. We get a flashback to when Cosmo's family was killed and how she was captured and had a device lodged into her brain that caused everything she sees and hears to be reported back to the Metarex. So this explains why the Metarex were constantly able to find Sonic and friends and constantly basically beat them with their strategies. It's because they had an unknowing spy the whole time, and it was Cosmo. And so the next episode is a very sad one, where Cosmo refuses to leave her room, feeling like she's a threat to everyone. Just speaking or seeing anyone is a threat to them. And so, meanwhile, Tails and Knuckles are arguing over what to do with Cosmo. They still see her as a friend, but they're worried that they can't keep her around if she's going to keep risking them like this. And Knuckles asks if there's any way they can surgically remove the device from her brain, but Chris points out that doing so would leave her blind and deaf. Meanwhile, poor Cosmo overhears just Tails and Knuckles arguing with each other over the options, and it just makes her feel worse. Eventually, she even lashes out at poor Cream, who was just trying to help her out and cheer her up. Meanwhile, Amy and Rouge discover the Metarex's homeworld and see a past recording that reveals why the Metarex are doing what they're doing. What started off as a self-defense from other invaders turned out to be an out-of-control war obsession, which caused the females of the Cedrians to flee their homeworld and try to destroy the destructive men in the process, who are obsessed with transformation into these giant beast-like creatures, where the females basically want to not... they came up with a way to not transform by having these special gems that they put on their chests, and that prevents them from transforming and going berserk. And the men want to use that strength to fight off their invaders, and eventually Cosmo tries fleeing, but Tails and the others stop her. They say that they don't care if she's an unwilling spy. They're going to stand together and fight off the Metarex together. And so Rouge even joins in, but Shadow leaves. He eventually comes back after he gets a ride with the Chaotix, and he changes his mind. But so over the course of the season, we even see Eggman joining the Metarex's side, but it's actually revealed that he was stealing secrets from them the whole time, and he was sending basically their strategies to Sonic and crew to help them out. So down the line, it leads to both Sonic and his friends joining forces with Eggman to take down the Metarex. The final set of episodes show Dark Oak and his last two Elite Four generals as they plant themselves in the planet they were constructing, as they began a metamorphosis that turns them into a three-headed dragon monster. They destroy Amy's ship, causing Sonic to sacrifice himself to try protecting Amy and the others, as Sonic falls into the water of the planet and ends up trapped. The next episode features the characters fighting back, leading to Amy eventually falling in after Sonic, and the two of them somehow get saved by the energy of their planet egg. It's a very beautiful, cute, and romantic scene between them as they're holding on to each other and being flown off to safety. Despite all the damage the Metarex received, they are still standing and start sending a wave that is draining the life from everyone. It affects everyone but Cosmo, since she's immune to their effects, being the same species as them. Cosmo ends up taking off the gem that was preventing her from transforming as she flies over to the Metarex, plants herself into them, and takes over their minds for the time being. She basically has them immobilized, and she requests Tails to shoot her. This is a very tragic and heartbreaking scene that was badly butchered in the 4Kids version. The Japanese version spends a lot more time on Tails trying to comprehend what he has to do to Cosmo, and I mean, he was basically asked to go old Yeller on her, for crying out loud, and the love of his life. And after many struggles, Tails looks like he's about to refuse to do it, but he ends up doing it anyways while trying to confess that he loves her at the same time. The final episode is a very bittersweet one that is heavily trimmed in the 4Kids version. It's honestly so much better in the Japanese version. The English version removes way too many scenes that show what the characters were up to after the tragic events that unfolded. While the Japanese version is the superior finale, I have to admit that the ordering for the events in the finale are very strange. It fails to show what happened after Tails shot Cosmo until halfway through the episode. The 4Kids version bothered reordering the episode to narratively flow better. It actually starts off showing what happened after Tails shot Cosmo, and then it leads to meanwhile what happened afterwards. But here they had it all out of order in the Japanese version. It doesn't excuse them for cutting so much from the episode in the English dub, though. But the episode starts off with a lot of slice of life stuff. We see Vanilla baking for the Chaotix to cheer them up after all the money they lost due to their mishaps in space. Vector learns from Vanilla that ever since they got back, Cream has been baking every day. And we see Amy and Cream bake Tails a pie to try to cheer him up after what happened. Suddenly, it cuts to Chris sharing a narration on how things eventually went back to normal for Sonic and his friends, but since the loss of Cosmo, but it wasn't easy. And then it cuts back to the aftermath of Cosmo's death, where Tails is horrified by what he had to do, and he gets basically words from Cosmo's spirit before she fades away, thanking him for saving her people and all that, and saving the world and all that. And so Cosmo's death managed to cause an explosion of the plant eggs to come hurling towards everyone, but Shadow manages to save everyone by using his strength, using chaos control on the explosion, managing to warp it all to safety, basically warp them back to their respective planets and all that. But he vanishes after that, and at the very end of the episode, it is revealed that Shadow is still fine. It shows him paying a visit to Molly's grave. So Sonic tried looking for Cosmo, but all he could find was a seed. He gives it to Tails, causing Tails to break into tears and yell at Sonic that he had faith that Sonic would save her. Meanwhile, we cut back to the present. Chris is starting to feel like he may never return home, and is thinking of where he'll live. We cut to a scene of Sonic resting under a tree and hearing Dark Oak's words echoing on how their battle still isn't over. Honestly, I like how 4Kids handled this scene a lot better, where instead of Dark Oak, Sonic is hearing Cosmo's voice as she thanks him for everything they've done and how the seeds of her family are planted and being reborn. She asks Sonic to tell Tails that she's okay. Honestly, I think that's a much better scene than what we got in the Japanese version. Meanwhile, Eggman reveals he built a machine that can send Chris home, but to mess with him, he says how it's designed to only work within the next 3 minutes, meaning Chris won't have time to say goodbye to Sonic and his friends. But Chris ends up taking that chance anyways, hoping Sonic and pals will understand his decision. As Chris blasts off back home, Eggman and his minions feel happy for getting one less person to stop them out of the way, as they make plans for a new scheme. We see one by one each character getting ready to stop Eggman at whatever he's up to next. Meanwhile, we see Chris looking out of the window of the rocket he's in as he sees Sonic keeping up with the rocket to see Chris off. The last shot we see of the show is Cosmo seed sprouting from a leaf in a pot that Tails planted in his workshop. The end. Overall, that was Sonic X. Still to this day, the only anime series adaptation of Sonic X, TV show-wise. And despite its many flaws, it still might be one of the best TV show adaptations of Sonic, at least when it comes to the Japanese version. It is also the longest-running Sonic show. While Sonic Boom has the most number of episodes, it doesn't equal the same amount of runtime as Sonic X, since Sonic Boom contains 11-minute segments compared to Sonic X's full 23-minute run. So to this day, there is still fan art of people using the Sonic X art style, showing that the show's art style is still it still appeals to many Sonic fans, and it's a shame that we will likely never see characters like Metal Sonic, Silver Blaze, or the Babylon Rogues show up in a Sonic X animation style. Some of these characters still have yet to make appearances on a TV show of Sonic to begin with. So overall, I would recommend the Sonic X Japanese version, but only if you're a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog, mainly the video games. So, and if you're willing to read through a wall of subtitles. But overall, I'd give the Japanese version of Sonic X a 7.5 out of 10, while probably giving the 4Kids dub a 5 out of 10. Anyways, that's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching. See you next time, and have a great day.